الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد الأمين وعلى آله وأصحابه الطيبين الطاهرين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين.
Start with the name of Allah, and we praise Him for the endowments that He bestowed upon us, and we ask Allah to raise the rank of our Prophet Muhammad and his believing relatives and noble companions, and to protect his nation from that which he fears for them on the day of judgment.
كنا تكلمنا أمس في التيمم، في فرائض التيمم. بقي علينا مسألة من أمر التيمم، وهو بماذا ينتقض التيمم.
Yesterday we spoke about the integrals of at-tayammum, the dry purification. And today, insha'Allah ta'ala, we will begin by speaking about the invalidators of tayammum.
ينتقد التيمم بكل ما ينقض الوضوء.
Tayammum is invalidated by everything that invalidates wudu.
نواقض الوضوء ذكرناها قبلا.
The invalidators of wudu, we mentioned them before.
ويزيد التيمم على الوضوء بنقضه بأمر آخر.
And there is an additional matter that invalidates the tayammum, which does not invalidate the wudu.
وهو وجود الماء قبل الدخول في الصلاة.
And that is the existence of water before initiating the prayer.
أما بعد الدخول في الصلاة، قبل الدخول في الصلاة معناه قالوا إن كان في الوقت سعة لأن يتوضأ ويصلي بوضوء.
They said before the entrance or the initiation of the prayer, that is, if there was enough time for the person to make wudu and to pray.
أما إن كان الوقت ضيقا بحيث لو أراد أن يتوضأ ويصلي بوضوء لفات الوقت، هنا يصلي بالتيمم الذي هو عليه.
However, if the time was tight in a way that had he performed wudu and prayed, then the time would be out. In this case, he would pray with at-tayammum.
أما إن وجد الماء وقد بدأ بالصلاة فلا ينتقض تيممه.
However, if he finds water and he already initiated the prayer, and he found water, then this does not invalidate his tayammum.
ولو لم ينهي الصلاة بعد.
Even if he has not yet completed the prayer.
وبالأولى إن أنهى الصلاة.
And even more so, if he were to have completed the prayer, the case would be that.
إلا إذا وجد الماء وقد بدأ في الصلاة، لا وكان الماء بين متاعه لكن هو بتقصير منه لم يجده، هذا يقطع.
Unless he has initiated the prayer and he found water, and this water turned to be amongst his belongings. However, he fell short in searching for water, so that's why he made tayammum. In this case, the prayer would be cut. In this case, the tayammum would be invalidated.
أما إن جلب له الماء وقد بدأ في الصلاة لا يقطع.
However, if the water was brought to him and he already initiated the prayer, he already started praying, then this does not invalidate the tayammum.
قال المؤلف رحمه الله: فصل: ومن انتقض وضوءه حرم عليه الصلاة والطواف وحمل المصحف ومسه.
The author, may Allah have mercy upon him, said, section: whoever invalidates their wudu is prohibited from prayer, circumambulating the Kaaba, and carrying or touching the book of the Quran.
ولو كان المصحف في علاقة خاصة به لا يجوز حمله بدون وضوء. في كيس خاص به.
even if the Quran was in a bag that is specific for it, it would not be permissible to carry it.
أما إذا كان في حقيبة السفر مثلا أو في حقيبة فيها المصحف وغيره تحمل.
However, if this book of the Quran was in a luggage, for example, or in baggage that is used for travel, or it was with other things, with other books, for example, then it is permissible to carry this bag or this luggage
بدون وضوء.
without being on wudu.
نعم. الممنوع هو أحيانا يعملون بيت خاص للمصحف، علاقة خاصة للمصحف، هذا لا يجوز حمله ولو بعلاقته بالحبل اليد، يعني للحقيبة الخاصة بالمصحف بدون وضوء.
Sometimes they make a bag that is specific for the Quran, so it would not be permissible to carry the mushaf in such a way, even with this bag, even if it has things that one would, things in which he would use to carry, or like a rope that is connected to this bag that he would carry it with. This would not be permissible if he is not on wudu.
وكذلك المس ولو من غير حمل لا يجوز، ولو كان المس على الأماكن البيضاء التي تحيط بالكلام لا يجوز كذلك.
Likewise, it's not permissible to touch the Quran even if one does not carry it. Included in this is touching the white margins of the Quran, the blank spaces that surround the text, for example. This is also included, that it is forbidden without wudu.
ويمكن الصبي للدراسة من حمل جزء بخلاف المكمل. الصبي الذي يريد أن يحفظ في القرآن هذا يمكن من حمل الجزء الذي يحفظ به ولو من غير وضوء.
The author said the child is enabled for study to carry a partial volume and not the entire book, to carry a juz' of the Quran and not the entire book. The child who wants to study the Quran, to memorize the Quran, he is enabled to carry the juz' of the Quran that he is memorizing from.
وقيل المكمل كذلك، لكن المشهور أنه يمكن من جزء، لأنه لا يحفظ في كل القرآن دفعة، فما يحتاجه هو جزء ليحفظ به، هذا الذي يمكن أن يحمله بلا وضوء.
And it was said that the entire book is like that. There is another saying that is less common in the Maliki school, that this child would be enabled to carry the entire book of the Quran. However, the more widespread, the more famous saying in the Maliki school is what we mentioned previously, that he is enabled to carry the juz' of the Quran that he is memorizing from. They said because the child or the person, when memorizing the Quran, would not memorize the Quran all at once. This child would not memorize the Quran all at once. Therefore, he is only enabled to carry the juz' of the Quran that he is memorizing from.
هذا قلنا للمتعلم.
This is, as we said, for the child who is studying.
وبعض المالكية يقولون للمعلم كذلك.
And some of the Maliki scholars, they also said this applies to the teacher as well.
على نفس الخلاف.
And likewise, regarding the teacher, the difference is the same difference regarding carrying the juz' or carrying the entire Quran.
أما كتب الشرع التي فيها بعض الآيات التي يستدل بها على بعض الأحكام، هذه ليس لها حكم المصحف، يجوز حملها ولو بدون وضوء.
As for the books of religious knowledge that contain some of the Quranic verses that are used for evidence, then this does not have the judgment of carrying the mushaf. One would be able to carry these books of Islamic knowledge without being on wudu.
حتى كتب التفسير، تفسير القرآن التي تكون فيه الآيات ممزوجة بالشرح وليست مفصولة عن الشرح يجوز حملها ولو بدون وضوء.
And likewise, the books of tafsir, of Quranic explanation, if the words of the explanation is mixed with the verses of the Quran, it is permissible to carry such a book of Quranic explanation without being on wudu, as opposed to the books of Islamic interpretation or explanation, in which the Quranic verses are separate from the explanation.
أما بعض كتب التفسير يكون وضع الآيات في أعلاها مفصولة ثم الشرح ممزوجا في الأسفل، هذا حكمه حكم القرآن، لا يجوز حمله بدون وضوء.
Some of the books of Quranic explanation, they would place the verses of the Quran at the top part of the page, and then at the bottom part of the page, the verses would be also included with the explanation between the different verses, mixed with the different verses. This likewise would have the judgment of carrying the Quran.
الحمل أو المس نفس الحكم.
Carrying or touching the Quran, the judgment is the same.
والكتابة كذلك نفس الأحكام.
And likewise, writing pertaining to writing the Quran, this has the same judgment.
يعني إذا كان يكتب آيات القرآن مفصولة لا يجوز إذا كان يضع يده على الورقة إلا مع الوضوء، لأنه يكون كأنه يمس القرآن أو جزءا منه. أما إذا كان يكتب علم الدين أو علم التفسير فالآيات فيه ممزوجة مع الكلام، هذا يجوز بلا وضوء. الكتابة نفس المس والحمل.
Likewise with writing, if someone is writing the verses of the Quran separate from the explanation, he cannot place his hands on this paper because now it has the judgment of the Quran. However, if he writes the Quran with explanation, the explanation is between the verses of the Quran, not separate from the verses of the Quran, or he writes Islamic knowledge and amongst what he writes are some verses that are used as evidence, then this he does not need to be on al-wudu.
قال المؤلف رحمه الله: ويحرم على الجنوب هذه، يعني الأمور التي مرت: صلاة، طواف، حمل المصحف، مسه، وقراءة القرآن. الجنوب يزيد على ما مر أنه يحرم عليه القراءة كذلك.
The author said, it is unlawful for the one who is in the state of janaba, which is the state of being in major ritual impurity due to sexual intercourse or ejaculation, to do the aforementioned matters. The aforementioned, which we mentioned: prayer, circumambulating the Kaaba, carrying the Quran, and touching the Quran, and to recite the Quran. In addition to what is prohibited for the one who is not on the state of wudu, the one who is junub, who is in the state of janaba, he is prohibited from also reciting the Quran.
للجنب قالوا إلا نحو، يجوز له أن يقرأ نحو آيات التعوذ، لكن لا بنية التلاوة، إنما بنية التعوذ، يعني التحصين مثلا.
They said, however, regarding the junub, he is permitted to only recite the verses of protection, not with the intention of recitation, of Quranic recitation, but with the intention of seeking protection.
من آيات التعوذ مثلا آية الكرسي.
Amongst the verses of protection is the Ayatul Kursi.
يجوز للجنب أن يقرأها بنية التحصين، التعوذ.
It is permissible for the junub to recite this with the intention of protection.
المعوذات الثلاث.
The three mu'awwidhat.
يعني قل هو الله أحد، قل أعوذ برب الفلق، قل أعوذ برب الناس، يجوز.
The three chapters, the three surah, قل هو الله أحد، قل أعوذ برب الفلق, and قل أعوذ برب الناس, they are permissible for example.
سألنا شيخنا رحمه الله: لما يقال لها المعوذات الثلاث؟ قل أعوذ برب الفلق فيها قل أعوذ، قل أعوذ برب الناس فيها قل أعوذ، قل هو الله أحد ليس فيها أعوذ. لما يقال المعوذات الثلاث إذن؟ قال الإخلاص معوذة معنى ولو لم يكن فيها التعويذ لفظا.
Shaykh Muhammad says, we asked Shaykh Abdullah rahimahullah, why are these three surah called the Mu'awwidhat, which are the surah by which one would seek refuge with Allah? Why were they called the Mu'awwidhat? Regarding Surah Al-Falaq, it's clear, and it mentions قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ. This word أَعُوذُ, which refers to seeking refuge with Allah Ta'ala, was mentioned in Surah Al-Falaq and Surah An-Nas. So it's clear why they are considered amongst the Mu'awwidhat. But what about Surah Al-Ikhlas, which says, and it starts with قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٍ, and does not have the word that refers to أعوذ or at-ta'weed, seeking refuge with Allah Ta'ala? He said because in meaning Surah Al-Ikhlas entails seeking refuge with Allah, even though this wording is not included in it.
وكذلك يجوز للجنب أن يقرأ نحو آية أو آيتين أو ثلاثة عند الاستدلال. كان يتكلم مع شخص فأراد أن يستدل على شيء من الشرع، ذكر آية للاستدلال وليس للتلاوة، يجوز كذلك كالتعوذ.
Likewise, it is permissible for the junub, the one who is in the state of janaba, to recite one verse or two verses of the Quran, for example, when trying to establish a proof. If he is speaking to someone and wants to establish a proof, this is similar to the state of the one who recites verses of the Quran with the intention of protection or for protection.
إذن الجنب يقرأ الآيات القليلة ليس الكثيرة، قالوا كالآيتين والثلاث للتعوذ وللاستدلال فقط.
Therefore, the junub recites Quran, it is permitted for him to recite Quran in the state when he is doing it for protection and when he is establishing an evidence or a proof. However, they said that he would recite a few verses, like 2 or 3 verses, in the state when he wants to recite Quran, when he is junub, for protection and or for establishing the evidence.
حتى عند الشافعية.
Even this is also according to الشافعي, the Shafi'i scholars.
ودخول المسجد ولو مجتازا على المشهور، يعني على الجنب على المشهور عندهم لا يجوز له أن يدخل المسجد ولو مجتازا، يعني كان للمسجد بابان، أراد أن يدخل من باب ويخرج من باب بدل أن يلتف حوله. على المشهور حتى هذا لا يجوز للجنب.
Likewise, the junub is prohibited from entering the mosque, even to transverse it according to the famous saying. Even to transverse the mosque, that is, if the mosque were to have 2 entrances or 2 doors, for example, and he wanted to transverse through the mosque from one door, transverse the mosque and exit through the other door instead of going around the mosque, according to the famous saying, it is still prohibited.
ونقل عن مالك الجواز إن كان عابر سبيل. نقل عن مالك أن هذا يجوز لعابر السبيل، يعني للمسافر، أنه يجوز أن يمر فيه مجتازا. من المسافر ليس المقيم.
And its permissibility of transversing the mosque and its permissibility for the traveler was narrated from Malik. That is, to transverse the mosque, it is narrated that Malik said that transversing the mosque for the traveler is permissible. As for the resident, if he is junub, he is not permitted to transverse the mosque.
قال وعلى الحائض والنفساء هذه دون قراءة القرآن. الحائض والنفساء يحرم عليها كل ما مر: الصلاة، الطواف، حمل المصحف، مسه، دون قراءة القرآن.
He said it is unlawful for the menstruating and postpartum bleeding woman to do all of the aforementioned except reciting the Quran.
فلا يحرم عليهما قراءة القرآن.
Therefore, it is not prohibited for the menstruating and postpartum bleeding woman to recite the Quran.
لكن يجوز لهما قراءة القرآن، لا يحرم، لكن من غير مس، إما من حفظها أو بالنظر، تنظر وتقرأ، أو من حفظها.
It is permissible for these two to recite the Quran, meaning the postpartum bleeding woman and the menstruating woman, to recite the Quran without touching the Quran. Either she recites the Quran from her memorization or by merely looking at the verses without touching.
باللسان يعني ليس بالقلب.
Reciting, that is, with her own tongue.
أما في القلب فيجوز حتى للجنب أن يقرأ بقلبه كل القرآن.
As for reciting in one's heart, this is permissible even for the junub, and he can even recite the whole Quran in his heart.
نعم نعم نعم. قالوا ما الفرق بين لما يجوز للحائض والنفساء ولا يجوز للجنب؟ قالوا لأن الجنب أمره بيده، يستطيع أن يغتسل ويمس أو يقرأ. الحائض أمرها ليس بيدها، ما ليس بيدها أن تقطع الحيض لتغتسل وتقرأ القرآن، عليها أن تنتظر، وقد تطول هذه المدة، وقد تطول إلى 15 يوما.
Why is it permissible for the menstruating and postpartum bleeding woman to recite the Quran as opposed to the junub? We said the junub is not permitted to recite the Quran with the details that we mentioned. This is because the situation of the junub is in his control. He is able to perform al-ghusl and to perform the purification at will. As for the menstruating and postpartum bleeding woman, this is not something that is in her control. The menstruating woman, for example, she might menstruate for 15 days, and this is something that she cannot control. This is why they made the difference between the menstruating woman and likewise the postpartum bleeding woman versus the junub.
ويحرم عليهما الصوم قبل الانقطاع. قبل انقطاع الدم لا يجوز الصوم، أما بعد انقطاع الدم يجوز أن تنوي الصيام وتبدأ بالصيام ولو لم تغتسل بعد.
And fasting is forbidden for them before the cessation of the bleeding. If the bleeding has ceased, has terminated, it is permissible for them to fast even if they have not yet taken the ghusl, the purificatory body wash.
والجماع قبل الغسل كذلك يحرم عليهما الجماع قبل الغسل ولو بعد الانقطاع، لا يجوز قبل الغسل.
And likewise, sexual intercourse is prohibited for them before the ghusl. Before the ghusl, it is prohibited for them to engage in sexual intercourse. Even if the bleeding has terminated, it is prohibited for them from engaging in sexual intercourse until they have performed the ghusl.
قال المؤلف رحمه الله: فصل: ومن شروط الصلاة الطهارة من الحدثين وكذا الطهارة عن النجاسة في البدن والثوب والمكان.
The author, may Allah have mercy upon him, said, section: among the conditions for the prayer is purity from the two ritual impurities and purity from najas filth in the body, clothing, and place of prayer.
في البدن واضح والثوب واضح. في المكان ما معناه؟ معناه المكان الذي تصيبه بأعضائك، ولا يدخل في ذلك ما كان مثلا تحت صدرك عند الركوع يحاذي صدرك، أو عند السجود يوجد نجاسة عند سجودك كان تحت صدرك لكن ما لمسته، هذا لا يؤثر. في المكان معناه تحت قدميك وتحت ركبتيك عند السجود وتحت وجهك وتحت يديك، وليس ما يحاذي جسدك.
It is clear when we say in the body and clothing, but what does it mean when we say in the place of prayer? What is meant here is that the parts of the body that one makes in contact with the part of the floor that one contacts with his body, what he makes contact with his body when he prays, there must be no najas filth in this spot where he makes contact with his body during the prayer. This does not include what one does not contact during prayer, such as what is parallel to one's chest while one is making ruku' bowing during the prayer. If there is najas filth that is parallel to his chest, he is not contacting this part with his chest. It is parallel to his chest. This would not affect the validity of the prayer. And likewise in prostration, when he is prostrating in as-sujud, if there is najas filth that is parallel to his chest, in as-sujud he does not make contact with the ground with his chest. So this would not affect the validity of the prayer. However, what would affect the validity of the prayer are the points of contact, such as his hands, his knees, his feet. If there is najas filth in these areas, for example, or where the face is placed during as-sujud, then this would affect the validity of the prayer.
كذلك لو كان مكان نجس فوضع سجادة مثلا أو ثوبا وصلى على الثوب الذي هو فوق النجاسة كذلك لا يؤثر على الصلاة.
Likewise, if there was a najas filth and he placed a cloth or a carpet or a rug on this najas filth and he prays on top of this rug or this material, then this does not affect the validity of the prayer.
طبعا إذا كانت النجاسة جافة وليس رطبة وإلا انتقلت النجاسة إلى الثوب فصار يصلي على ثوب النجس.
And of course this applies if the filth was dry and not wet, because if the filth was wet, then this cloth or piece of clothing that he placed or this rug that he placed, the najas filth would have been transferred to this thing that he placed, and now it would be najas filthy and it would not be permissible to pray on.
فلا يدخل في قولنا لأنه هو الآن يصلي على نجاسة وقد ذكرنا أن الصلاة على النجاسة لا تصح.
And so this would of course not be included in the exception that we mentioned, because we already said that if it is najas filthy, then it is not permissible to pray on. It is not permissible for him to pray in a place of najas filth. And so this piece of clothing would become najas filthy if it came in contact with a moist, wet najas filth.
قال والمحمول له كقنينة يحملها في جيبها، يعني لا يجوز له أن يحمل النجاسة وهو يصلي ولو كان ثوبه نفسه طاهرا وبدنه طاهر، لكن يحمل نجسا معه ولو كان في قنينة لا زجاج مثلا مغلقة لا تنقل النجاسة إلى ثوبه ولا إلى بدنه، كذلك هذا لا يجوز له أن يصلي هكذا.
And likewise, what one carries in prayer, such as a bottle carried in one's pocket, if this bottle has najas filth in it, it is not permissible to pray in such a fashion. It would not be valid. Even if the body and the clothing are still pure, even as we said, the najas filth is an enclosed glass container and he is carrying this container, so the najas filth is not contaminating his body nor his clothing, this still would not be valid.
فإن لاقاه نجس أو محموله بطلت صلاته ولو ألقاه حالا. إذا كان وهو في الصلاة أصابته النجاسة على بدنه أو على محموله على ثوبه على ما يحمل من المتاع، إن أصابت ذلك النجاسة بطلت صلاته ولو ألقاه فورا.
And if the najas filth contacted him or what he carries, then his prayer is invalidated even if he removed it immediately.
قال ويجب إزالة نجس لم يعف عنه بإزالة العين من طعم ولون وريح بالماء المطهر.
removing the unexempted najas filth is obligatory by removing the entity and the characteristics of taste, color, and smell with purifying water.
هذا لأجل الصلاة.
And this is for the prayer.
يعني عند إرادة الصلاة لا يجب عليه أن يزيله فورا متى ما أصابه.
This is an obligation when it comes to him wanting to pray. It does not mean that it is an immediate obligation that he must remove this najas filth.
وقيل عندهم تصح إزالة النجاسة بأي مائع قلاع كالخل مثلا يقلع. إزالة النجاسة بأي مائع قلاع.
And it is also said, according to them, that it is valid to remove the najas filth by any liquid that is
يقلع النجاسة. شو يعني؟
that uproots or that removes the najasa. Someone has a better word for it. Uprooting the najas filth. It's like vinegar.
من ماذا أخذ هذا القول؟ مما نقل عن الإمام مالك أنه سئل عمن دميت لثته، النير يعني اللثة، من دميت لثته، فقال إذا بصق ثم بصق ثم بصق حتى نقى الريق طهر الفم، لا يحتاج أن يصب الماء في فمه. فقالوا هذا بما طهر ريقه، بما طهر فمه؟ بريقه، والريق ليس ماء بل مائع قلاع.
They took this because it is narrated that Malik, he was asked about a person who had whose gums were bleeding in his mouth, and so he said that if he continues to spit and to spit and to spit, meaning to expel the saliva from his mouth continuously, and so it becomes clear there's no more blood, then it has become pure, the mouth has become pure. And so one is not required in this case to rinse the inside of his mouth. They said, how did the mouth become pure? Due to an uprooting liquid, that is the saliva. It was removed through the saliva, and so they compared what is similar to that.
هذا لإزالة النجس المائع القلاع، ليس لرفع الحدث. أما رفع الحدث لا بد فيه من الماء الطهور.
This is for removing the najas filth, not for lifting the ritual impurity. As for lifting the ritual impurity, one must use pure and purifying water.
قال رحمه الله: وكل هذا على القول بوجوب إزالة النجاسة، وهي سنة مؤكدة عند مالك وأصحابه، وعند غيرهم واجبة من أجل الصلاة. يقول.
The author, may Allah have mercy upon him, said, all of this is according to the saying that removing najas filth is obligatory. However, it is an emphasized sunnah recommended matter according to Malik and his colleagues. And according to others, it is obligatory. That is for the prayer. This is in regards for the purpose of praying.
معناه أن المشهور من مذهب مالك أنه لا بد من إزالة النجاسة لصحة الصلاة، لكن يوجد قول منقول عن مالك وعن أصحابه أيضا أن إزالة النجاسة لصحة الصلاة ليست واجبة بل سنة مؤكدة. معناه لو صلى وعليه نجاسة قادر على إزالتها، على هذا القول المنقول عن الإمام تصح صلاته، لكن بعضهم يقول مع المعصية وبعضهم يقول بلا ثواب.
So regarding what we mentioned, that it is an obligation, according to the famous saying in the Maliki school, the most widespread saying in the Maliki school, that removing the najas filth is an obligation, removing the unexempted najas filth is an obligation for the validity of the prayer. And this is the famous saying. However, there is another saying that is narrated from Malik, in which removing the najas filth for the prayer is not considered an obligation, but rather it is considered an emphasized sunnah. However, here there is a difference. Would it be considered, would one be
هو ثلاثة أقوال بالنسبة للنجاسة لصحة الصلاة. القول الأول أن إزالة النجاسة واجبة وشرط صحة. القول الثاني أنها واجبة ولكن ليس شرط صحة، معناه لو تركها عصى لكن صح العمل، هذا معنى الواجب وليس شرط صحة. والقول الثالث أنه ليس واجبا وليس شرط صحة، بل هو سنة مؤكدة. فعلى القول الأول لا تصح الصلاة وعليه معصية لو صلى مع وجود النجاسة، واجب وشرط صحة. واجب معناه إن فعل عليه معصية إن لم يتطهر قبل ذلك، شرط صحة معناه ما صحت صلاته. القول الثاني واجب وليس شرط صحة، معناه من صلى وعليه نجاسة قادر على رفعها عصى لأنها واجب، لأن التطهر واجب، ليس شرط صحة معناه صحت صلاته، عصى وصحت صلاته. الثالث أنه لا واجب ولا شرط صحة، إنما هو سنة مؤكدة، معناه من صلى وعليه نجاسة قادر على رفعها صحت صلاته مع الكراهة بلا ثواب، سقط الفرض عنه فقط.
So here there are three sayings regarding this matter. The first saying is that the removal of this unexcused najas filth is an obligation and a condition for the validity of the prayer. Therefore, the one who does not remove the najas filth, the unexempted najas filth, and he prays in such a state, then not only would he be sinful, but his prayer is also invalid. And there is a second saying in which they mention that removing the unexempted najas filth is an obligation, however, it is not a condition for the validity of the prayer. Therefore, according to them, if one were to pray without removing the unexempted najas filth, then his prayer would be valid, but he would be sinful. The prayer is valid, but he would be sinful. And there is a third saying in which they mention that removing the unexempted najas filth is neither obligatory nor a condition for the validity of the prayer. According to this saying, if one were to pray, however, they said removing the najas filth is an emphasized sunnah. Therefore, according to this saying, if one were to pray without removing this unexempted najas filth, his prayer is valid, he is not sinful, however, he would be falling into a disliked matter and his prayer would be without reward.
ما المشهور من هذه الثلاثة؟ الأول أنه واجب وشرط صحة، معناه لا ينبغي أن يصلي الإنسان مع وجود النجاسة وهو قادر على إزالتها ولو كان يوجد تلك الأقوال.
And which saying amongst these three is the most famous? The first saying is the most famous, that it is both an obligation and a condition for the validity of the prayer. Therefore, a person who is able to remove this najas filth should not keep this najas filth upon his body or clothing or what he carries when he prays.
لأنه إما يكون أوقع نفسه في أن صلاته ما صحت وعليه معصية، أو أوقع نفسه في أن صلاته صحت لكن عليه معصية، أو أوقع نفسه في أن صلاته صحت بلا ثواب.
Why should he not do that? Because if he were to do that, either his situation would be that his prayer was invalid and he was sinful, or that his prayer was valid but he was sinful, or that his prayer was valid without committing a sin but he has no reward from the prayer.
لكن الفقهاء أحيانا يذكرون الأقوال هذه مع أن الأحسن الأول وهو المشهور، أنه قد يكون أحيانا إنسان في عمله في الطريق أصابت يده نجاسة، يعسر عليه، وإن كان ممكن لكن يعسر عليه أن يطهر يده ليصلي، ماذا يفعل؟ يصلي، يأخذ بهذا القول هذه المرة وبعد هذا يتطهر.
The scholars, they mention these other sayings, although there is the first saying which is the famous and the better saying that one should take by. They mention the other sayings because of certain circumstances, such as the person who might be at work or the like, or he is traveling, and he was contaminated with najas filth. And it might be difficult upon him to purify this contamination. He might be able to, technically, it is possible that he would be able to purify this najas filth, but it might be something that is a hardship upon him. So in this case, he can take by these other sayings this time, and afterwards he purifies this spot that was contaminated with najas filth.
في المستشفيات أحيانا يعسر على المريض في المستشفى، يعني كل وقت قصير يدخل إليه الممرض، يضع عليه سبيرتو ليعطيه إبرة وما أشبه ذلك، على الأرض تكون نجاسات. عندما يعسر يستعمل الإنسان هذا القول، لكن لا يتخذها عادة أن يصلي مع وجود النجاسة.
Likewise, in the hospital, one might encounter this. Maybe every few minutes or so, the nurse would come into his room and apply some alcohol, and so there would be najas filth on him, and it would be difficult upon him to always remove this najas filth. So in this case, he can take by this saying. However, he would not take this as a habit for himself.
الحفاظ قد يكون نظيف. ما عملت له استنجاء، إذا ما عملت له استنجاء ما سامع فيها. أما إذا كان بالحفاظ فيه نجاسة على القول الأول فسدت صلاتها. مثل هذا مثلا إذا كانت أحيانا مرة مضطرة مستعجلة لها أن تأخذ بهذا القول الثاني أن صلاتها صحت، لكن على الأول فسدت على المشهور.
The sister asked about the situation if a woman is praying, for example, and her child who's wearing a diaper comes and hugs her. What is the judgment of the prayer? So she asked if this child, istinja was not performed for the child ahead of time. The Shaykh mentioned that he did not hear about, meaning the diaper was dry, it didn't have najas filth itself. However, the child did not have istinja performed for him ahead of time, and so the child comes and hugs his mother while she is praying. The Shaykh mentions that he did not hear about this. However, if the child had najas filth in his diaper, for example, and he hugged his mother while she is praying, then in this case, according to the first saying, her prayer would be invalidated. And in such a case, she can take by the other saying when she needs to take by the other saying, if the time, for example, is tight.
نعم. شو ما سمعت. نعم، للتعوذ فيها ثواب، للاستدلال على حسب نيته. نعم.
Regarding the junub who recites the Quran for protection, then yes, he would receive reward for doing so. And the other question was, what about if he recites certain verses of the Quran for establishing proofs? Then the Shaykh said, according to his intention, he would be able to get reward.
وعلى القول بالسنية تصح الصلاة مع وجود النجاسة ولكنه يعيد في الوقت استحبابا. هذا على القول الثالث أن إزالة النجاسة للصلاة سنة مؤكدة. على هذا القول تصح الصلاة مع وجودها، لكن طالما الوقت لم يخرج يستحب له أن يعيد الصلاة. لما يقولون يعيد استحبابا معناه لم يكن، ما بطلت صلاته، ولو بطلت لقالوا أعاد أبدا وليس في الوقت.
According to the saying of its recommendation, prayer is valid with the presence of najas filth. However, it is recommended for one to repeat the prayer within its time. If one were to have prayed according to this third saying, that it is recommended, if he were to pray with this najas filth, it is recommended for him, if he is still within the time of the prayer, to repeat the prayer.
قال رحمه الله: ولو ولغ الكلب في إناء الماء يغسل 7 للحديث. الكلب إذا ولغ في إناء الماء يقول يغسل 7 مرات، معناه إحداهن بالتراب من أجل الحديث. ما معنى ولغ؟ أدخل فمه.
The author said, if the dog laps in a container, it is washed 7 times due to the hadith, due to the prophetic narration. If the dog laps in a container, walagha, this refers to the dog placing his mouth into the container of water, for example. And lap specifically refers to if the animal takes the water or the food with his tongue. So if he were to do this, then one would wash the container 7 times due to the prophetic narration. That means 6 times with water, and one of the times is water with soil.
ليس معنى ذلك أن إحداهن بالتراب معناه يعمل طين ويغسل به، لا، إنما الماء نفسه في إحدى هذه المرات يعكره، يجعله معكرا بالتراب، يضع فيه شيئا من التراب حتى يصير ماء معكرا بالتراب، لكن هو ماء ليس طين.
And when we say that one of these 7 times is water mixed with soil, this does not mean that he would make it in a way that it becomes clay or like mud. Rather, what he would do is he would take some soil, add it to the water in a way that the water becomes murky due to the presence of the soil.
هذه مرة و6 مرات بالماء، وليس شرطا أن تكون في الأول أو في الأخير هذه المرة التي بالتراب.
This is 1 time with the water with soil, and then he would do 6 other times with water. And this wash that has soil in it does not have to be the first wash, and it does not have to be the last wash. It can be any one of the 7 washes.
الحديث: إذا ولغ الكلب في إناء أحدكم فليغسله 7 مرات إحداهن بالتراب. إذا ولغ كما ذكرنا إذا أدخل فمه.
And the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is, the meaning of it is that if the dog were to place his mouth in the container of any one of you, the container of water of any one of you, then let him wash this container 7 times, one of those 7 times with soil.
لابد من أن يكون ماء نقيا في البقية.
There's a question: can one wash all of these 7 washes? Can they all be water mixed with soil? The Shaykh said that, like we said, 1 of them is water mixed with soil, and the other 6 has to be pure water.
أليس ذكرنا أمس أو قبل أمس أن التطهر لابد أن يكون بماء طهور لم يخالطه غيره ولو كانت المخالطة طاهرة بحيث يتغير اسمه؟ هذا إن غير اسمه هل يقال عنه ماء فقط؟ ولو تغير بالتراب تغير، والتراب ولو كان طاهرا يعتبر ماء مغيرا.
Didn't we mention yesterday that the purification for removing the najas filth, the water that is used must be purifying water that is absolute water, meaning water that was not mixed with another pure substance that would change its qualities or its characteristics to the extent that you would no longer be able to call it water. So water, pure water, needs to be used for the other washes.
هذا للنجاسة. الآن هنا كلام آخر ليس يعني سنتكلم فيه أكثر. العبرة بالماء لما صب عليه الماء اختلط بالتراب بحيث تغير صار ممزوجا بالتراب وغلفه لهذا الإناء مثلا أو المكان. إن كان هكذا يعني صار الماء ممزوجا بالتراب وجرى على المكان، نعم، وإلا فلا. نعم. هو ليس هكذا، لأجل هذا قلت ليس الطين، لأن بعض الناس يجلب طين تراب ويضع عليه ماء حتى يصير طينا ثم يمسح به، يقول هذه بالتراب. هو ليس هكذا، هو ماء لكن ممزوج بالتراب التي هي إحداهن.
If one were to place soil on the part that is if one were to place soil and one were to pour water on the soil in a way that the water mixes with the soil and it runs on the spot, then this would be a sufficient wash, that is water mixed with soil. However, it would not be sufficient for one to put soil, for example, on his hand or whatever is contaminated, and to then add water to the extent that it becomes like mud or like clay, and he surrounds this part that is contaminated. This would not be sufficient.
يقول وفي وجوب الغسل وندبه روايتان، يعني يروى عن الإمام أنه يجب الغسل. لما يقول روايتان معناه عن الإمام، بخلاف ما لما يقول قولان يعني في المذهب، معناه يروى عن الإمام مالك أنه قال يجب الغسل 7 مرات إحداهن بالتراب، وبعضهم قال يسن الغسل ب7 مرات إحداهن بالتراب.
The author said there are 2 narrations concerning the obligation of washing and its recommendation. When we say there are 2 narrations, that means from the Imam himself, the Imam meaning Al-Imam Malik rahimahullah, as opposed to if we were to say there are 2 sayings. That means there are 2 sayings in the school, but 2 narrations, that is from the Imam. One of them is that it's an obligation to wash, meaning to wash this container 7 times, one of those times water mixed with soil. And according to another narration, it is a recommendation.
ولو أدخل يده أو رجله لم يغسل خلافا للشافعي. أما لو أدخل الكلب يده أو رجله في الإناء لا يغسل، لا يجب غسله ولا يندب خلافا للمذهب الشافعي.
However, if the dog inserted its paw or its foot into the container, then the container is not washed, as opposed to the position of Ash-Shafi'i. It is not obligatory nor is it recommended to wash.
هو مع ورود الحديث إذا ولغ الكلب في إناء أحدكم فليغسله 7 مرات إحداهن بالتراب، ثابت عندهم عند المالكية هذا الحديث، لكن أخذوا بظواهر الألفاظ كما هي. قالوا الرسول عليه الصلاة والسلام قالوا إذا ولغ الكلب، ما معنى ولغ؟ أدخل فمه، فلو أدخل يده أو رجله لا يعتبر هذا ولوغا فلا يدخل.
And this is because of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that we mentioned pertaining to this matter. They confirmed this hadith in which the Prophet mentioned that if a dog were to lap or place his mouth in the container of any one of you, then let him wash it 7 times, one of those times with soil, water with soil. They said based on this, what is included here is only this lapping or placing the mouth into the water that's in the container. It does not mention in the hadith placing his foot or his hand in the water, so this is not included. This is what the Malikis said. This is what their position was.
يتابع الحديث إذا ولغ الكلب في إناء أحدكم. قالوا الإناء إذا أطلق لفظه يراد به إناء الماء، لأجل هذا لو ولغ في إناء الطعام لا يدخل، لا يغسل.
They said also, furthermore, in the hadith the word ina was used without restriction, and in this context what this refers to container, without restriction. What is meant here by the container is the container of water. They said, therefore, if a dog were to place his mouth in the container of food, then this would not necessitate this washing.
نتابع الحديث. الرسول عليه الصلاة والسلام قال فليغسله 7 مرات. قالوا هل كل أمر من الرسول عليه الصلاة والسلام يدل على الوجوب وحده؟ لا، ليس دائما. أليس الرسول عليه الصلاة والسلام قال لا تصاحب إلا مؤمنا ولا يأكل طعامك إلا تقي؟ هل هذا واجب ولا يجوز غيره؟ لا يدل هذا على الوجوب. لأجل هذا يوجد روايتان في الحديث عن الإمام: يجب الغسل ويندب الغسل. مرة قال يجب الغسل ومرة قال يندب الغسل.
Furthermore, if we continue in the hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, then let him wash his container 7 times. One of them is water mixed with soil. And they said, is every command from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, does every command of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam necessitate obligation, that this is an obligatory matter? No. Wasn't it mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, do not befriend someone unless he is a righteous Muslim, and do not befriend someone unless they are a believer, and do not let anyone eat your food unless he was pious? This does not refer to it being an obligation, that one would be sinful if he were to befriend a non-Muslim, or that he would be sinful for letting a person who is not pious or righteous eat from his food. So likewise, it is narrated. This is why there are 2 narrations from Imam Malik. One narration is that it's an obligation to do this washing, and the other narration is that it's recommended.
ثم قالوا ولو جاء الأمر بالغسل هل يدل الأمر ولو كان على الوجوب على النجاسة؟ ليس شرطا، لأنه قد نؤمر بفعل شيء تعبدا فقط وليس لنجاسته. أليس أمرنا أن نمسح الخف من أعلى عندما لبس الخف؟ هل نمسح الخف من أعلى لأنه اتسخ أو لأنه نجس؟ لا، إنما أمر تعبدي. الخف يتسخ من أسفل، لما نمسحه من أعلى؟ هذا أمر تعبدي. فقالوا الغسل أيضا أمر تعبدي وليس لنجاسته. حتى الذين قالوا يجب الغسل 7 مرات إحداهن بالتراب قالوا لأنها تعبدنا بهذا، هذا أمر تعبدي ليس لنجاسته. قالوا ما وجدنا دليلا آخر يدل على النجاسة. الأمر بالغسل وحده قالوا لا يدل على النجاسة، قد يكون للنجاسة وقد لا يكون للنجاسة، ولا يحكم بالنجاسة بالشك إلا باليقين، وهنا لا يقين أن الأمر كان للنجاسة.
And they said, even if the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam commanded us to wash this container 7 times, 1 time mixed with soil, even if it is an obligation, what is the evidence that it is najas, filthy, that this would contaminate the container? They said we were ordered to do so, even those who said that it is an obligation to wash this container 7 times, 1 mixed with soil. They said because we were ordered with this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us with this, so we are obligated to fulfill this. Similar to wiping on the khuf. When we wipe on the khuf, we wipe from the top part of the khuf, the foot gear. And that is not because there is filth on top of the foot gear, but this is because this is a matter that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us with. And likewise, when it comes to cleaning this container, to washing this container, it is a matter that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us with. They said, and we did not find any other evidence that indicates or that necessitates that this would contaminate the container. So even the ones who said it is an obligation to wash this container, they did not say that this is because the container is now contaminated with najas filth, but rather this is due to an obligation that Allah the Exalted obligated us with. And they said something is not judged to be as najas filthy unless it is based upon certainty, and there is nothing here that gives us certainty about the contamination of such container.
هذه قاعدة، يعني لا يحكم بالنجاسة بالشك، لا يحكم بالشيء على أنه نجس بالشك إلا باليقين. فإذا شككت هل هذا تنجس أم لا تقول طاهر.
And this is a general rule that you do not judge something as najas filthy unless that is based upon certainty. If you doubt that this thing is contaminated with najas filth, you judge this thing as being pure.
تبقى على الأصل إلا أن تيقنت خلافه.
The matter remains upon its original state unless, which is purity, unless you are certain of what contradicts that which is contamination.
إذن ما يعني خلاصة الكلام، الكلب عندهم ماذا؟ كالهرة، ليس نجسا، ولو قالوا إذا ولغ يجب غسل مكانه ب7 مرات إحداهن بالتراب ليس لنجاسته.
So in general, in summary, according to them, the dog is not najas filthy. It is like the cat, according to them, except that if, according to those who said it's an obligation, if the dog were to lick from the container of water, then one would have to wash it 7 times, and that is not due to it being contaminated with najas filth.
يعني بوله روثه دمه هذا النجس فقط.
Rather, what is najas filthy from the dog is its urine, its feces, and its blood.
والخنزير مثله مثل الكلب.
And the pig is like the dog.
لأن النص هو ورد في الكلب والخنزير قيس عليه.
And that is because the text that was narrated, meaning the hadith that was narrated, was in regards to the dog. And they compared the pig to the dog, meaning they based the judgment of the pig based on the judgment of the dog that came in the religion.
وسبحان الله والحمد لله رب العالمين. الله سبحانه وتعالى أعلم. نعم، حمل التليفون الذي عليه خيال، لأن التليفون هو ما فيه أوراق مصحف حقيقة إنما خيال، فحمل التليفون وإن كنا فتحنا الابليكيشن يلي فيها مصحف يجوز، ولو كانت المرأة حائض، ولو كانت نفساء، ولو كان على غير طهارة يجوز، ليس له حكم حمل أوراق المصحف.
There's a question about the telephone. If one carries the telephone and the telephone has certain applications that they indicate verses of the Quran and the like, what is the judgment of carrying this? It is permissible for the person to carry this even if they are not upon purification, even for the menstruating and postpartum bleeding woman, because it doesn't actually contain pages of the Quran.
السلام عليكم. السلام عليكم أحبابنا. بس للتذكير الله يبارك فيكم, just as a reminder, يعني من ضمن آداب مجلس العلم لابد أن نتذكر, we need to remember that the questions and answers are part of the majlis of al-ilm. So don't assume that if the teacher said Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah, don't assume that the class is over until he says so. For when people are asking questions, this is part of the session. If some of you stand up and they start talking and they want to leave and cause commotion, this will disturb the session and people might lose receiving the knowledge. This is one thing. Another thing, subhanallah, if you notice from previous dawras, that usually the first class in the morning people come late, and probably because they stay up late at night. Subhanallah, this is a golden opportunity, as you know, to receive the knowledge, and this is a very interesting and important material. If you want to stay up late at night, make sure that you come to class at 9. Otherwise, we'll change the schedule, and that might be burdening to many of us. Make sure that you would be here for the class at 9 sharp. Allah yubariku fikum. So that all of us would reap the benefit and reap the reward. And I have a question, Sheikh. بالأقوال الثلاثة إذا واحد ليس عنده القدرة على إزالة النجاسة فيكون له ثواب في كل الأحوال.
إذا كان عن
عجز نعم
له ثواب
في الكل.
In regards to the one, there's Hajj Riyad asked a question about in the case, for those 3 cases for removing najas filth regarding the prayer, if one was unable to remove the najas filth, then he was unable to remove the najas filth, would he have reward for the prayer? Yes, he would have reward for the prayer according to all 3 because he was unable to remove the najas filth. لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله